And so we're continuing our class on sticky faith, and I hope you've read the book. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's been insightful for you. I've actually started reading a little bit from the Parents Edition, and like I said at the beginning of class, I'm kind of using the Youth Minister Edition, and I provided y'all with a Parent Edition, and I hope that would provide some good conversation. And actually, I've been looking at your edition kind of after I've prepared mine just to see if anything jumped out at me. And I think the Parent Edition actually is a lot better than the Youth Minister Edition. So I might switch to using the Parent one than the Youth Minister one. But let's do just a short recap of last week. Last week we talked about what is the gospel. And if you ask this class in your typical Church of Christ Bible class, you'd probably hear, what is the gospel? What's the death, burial, and resurrection, right? You probably hear that, and then what would be the other thing you hear? The gospel is good news, right? Those are usually the two things that you hear. That's kind of your those Bible school answers that are drilled into us. And we kind of get that, I think, from 1 Corinthians 15, 1 through 4. Paul's talking about the gospel, and in verse 3 says, "For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins, and that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day in accordance with Scripture." Yes, the gospel is the death, burial, and resurrection. And I think most of our teens know this, and most of us know this, but I think what we need to remember and maybe put more emphasis is the purpose of the gospel. And what the gospel means to us, right? And what the gospel provides for us. And that is in verse 2, by which we are being saved. And so the death, burial, and the resurrection of Christ means that we can be saved. That's the good news. Not just that Jesus died or that Jesus was buried or that Jesus was raised, but what that means to us. And so again, just a few things to make it practical. We have to teach our kids to trust God before they're going to obey God, right? It's the same way with parenting. They're not going to obey you if they don't trust that what you're trying to do is the right thing for them. We got to get past the Sunday school answers, and sometimes that means getting, maybe tackling some discussions and having conversations that maybe you've been putting off for a while. Jesus, yes, is the answer to everything, but they need to talk about how Jesus is the answer, not just that Jesus is the answer. So we need to get past, the yes and no and the Jesus Bible school answers. And we need to also express, myself as a youth minister and you as a parent, you need to express your trust in God to your teens and your belief in God to your teens. I know that those are probably conversations that, maybe it's awkward for both parties, but I think those are very, very crucial conversations to have. And then inevitably, when they do not obey, we need to respond with grace. And then number 5 is probably the most important thing. It's more caught than taught. You can put your kids in the best Christian schools and the best Bible classes, and you can have the best lessons and make them watch and read the best curriculum ever. But they're going to catch more than they're able to be taught. And so that puts a little bit more pressure on us, right? And how we're living our life. So this week we're going to talk about identity. What is someone's identity?
It's who they are. What makes them who they are?
Yeah.
What sets them apart from everyone else?
Right. So, when you got like a Facebook bio, and a lot of people don't even put it there. But does anybody have a bio on their Facebook or their Instagram? I'm not going to ask you to quote it verbatim, but does anybody have one of those? What do you have on yours, Steve?
I don't remember. It's different characteristics of what it says husband, father. It used to. I changed it so many times. But
yeah,
just lists various things that I am.
Right.
To different people.
Yeah. What would you say if someone asked you what your identity was? Does anybody have an answer what they would say about themselves? How would you describe yourself to someone else?
Most of us would say parent, probably
Parent?
first off.
Yeah. All of us would say parent, husband. I don't think we have any grandparents in here, but if grandparents are obviously very proud of their grandchildren.
Yes, we do. And we are.
And so, your identity is who you are. And so if I want to know what my identity is, I ask the question, who am I? Who am I? And that's a really big deal for teenagers. It's a really big deal for both middle schoolers and high schools. Who are they? And most of them don't know the answer to that. And maybe sometimes even we don't know what the answer to that is. Someone asks, who are you, Jody? No, not what do you do. Yeah, you're a youth minister, I get that. Yeah, you like to hunt, I get that. Yeah, you like to do this, you like to do that. What you do is not necessarily who you are. It maybe is a reflection of who you are. But a lot of people, and especially our teens, have a hard time identifying who they are. In the book, maybe you read this, but it presented two different stories of two girls that graduated from youth groups, the same youth group actually, and went to college. One of them went to a real prestigious, state university that had a lot of things to offer, and the other one went to a smaller school that was closer to home. And one girl went the route, and not that there's anything wrong with this inherently, but one girl went the route of joining a sorority and being really involved on campus and really involved in the college scene, and one of them was involved in the college scene but made some decisions like getting involved in the Christian campus club and all these things. And so anyways, basically it paints this picture, and I've only been a youth minister now, I guess, for 4 years, 4 or 5 years, but I've worked with some youth groups through college, and we talked about that first 2 weeks, right? Or I guess maybe actually it was a Sunday night. But I talked about those first 2 weeks when crucial decisions are made. I get most of our kids in here are not graduating or soon, but for the most part, I could tell you which kids are going to get involved before they even do it. I've been surprised a few times. I've probably had, at Mount Juliet, we had about 30 kids per class. And so over the course of 3 years, I had almost 100 kids graduate, and then here about 10 to 15. So I've had probably about 140 kids graduate, and I could probably tell you with 90 to 95% accuracy which ones were going to be involved in church and which ones weren't. And I've been surprised a little bit, but definitely not the majority. And the ones that were involved, when they went on college campuses, you know what they also visited? They didn't just visit the college, but they visited what? They visited, the Christian ministries or the churches. And a lot of that was not the kids' ideas. A lot of that, and maybe they didn't even want to do it, but a lot of that was the parents making them do it. We're going to go visit this church. We're going to go talk to this campus minister. And so anyways, the point when we're thinking about identity is some of them jumped headfirst into the campus ministry. And some of them jumped headfirst into just whatever it is, clubs, sororities, fraternities, or even not even just those things. Some of them jumped headfirst into internships, or some of them jumped headfirst into working somewhere. And not that there's anything wrong with those things inherently, but what happened was, this one over here that joined the campus ministry, what they decided was, I'm going to find my identity somewhere in this group, somewhere in this type of thing. And the other one said, well, I'm going to find my identity in my, my major club, or my sorority, my fraternity, or this or that. And so they're finding their identities in these things. There was a TV show. Does anybody ever, I know probably most of you aren't big fans of probably watch MTV. I don't even know if it's a channel anymore. But in 2010, apparently, there was a TV show called If You Really Knew Me. And the whole premise of this, by the way, this is not just something that Christian teens struggle with as far as their identity and who they are. This is something that all teens struggle with. They struggle with it so much that even MTV recognized it and did a couple seasons of it. And basically what they did is they went into these schools and they found all these kids that were basically living secret lives. I had a kid when I was an intern in Louisville, Texas, and he literally went by 2 different names depending on where he was. He went by Keith at church, and he went by Mitchell at school. And literally 2 completely different things. Keith was first place winner in last leader speech and song leading, and Mitchell was the coolest party guy in the entire school. And this is in Louisville, Texas, where there's big money. And see, he had a huge reputation as being the last leaders guy, and he had a huge reputation as being the huge partier. And so He was leading the secret life. And so what this TV show did is it went in and it exposed these secret lives. And what's interesting is, and I don't bring this up to like scare you to death or anything. If your kid won first place at Last Leaders, it doesn't mean he's the biggest partier in school. But what's interesting is and this is MTV saying this, every kid wanted to be found out. Every kid wanted to be found out. Maybe they were scared to do it. Maybe they were scared to come out to their parents or come out to their friends. But every kid wanted to be found out. And so even though they were finding maybe they had several different identities, all of them wanted to be really found out. I couldn't help but think about Aladdin, right? What did Aladdin try to portray himself as to get the girl? He tried to be king, right? He tried to be something he's not. And it wasn't just, and most of the time with Aladdin and with teens, most of the time it's not necessarily about making themselves look better to make themselves feel better. It's about what? Was Aladdin just doing this for himself? He's doing it for a girl, right? He's doing it for connections. He was doing it for relationships. And that's why our teens are doing it. And we talked a little bit about this last week, but teens don't just start drinking because they just have a taste for alcohol. They don't just start doing weed because they think, oh, well, it's just so wonderful, right? They do it because of connections. They do it because they want to be involved. They do it because they want to make friends. That's ultimately what it's all about. You know any teenagers that sneak a beer and go hide behind in the woods and never tell anybody about it, right? Teens don't do that. They don't just, maybe they do it once out of curiosity, but there's no like secret 13-year-old teens that are, 13 might be too early, 16, 17-year-old teens that are doing these bad behaviors in secret, right? Maybe you remember when you were that age, you didn't do these things in secret, right? You did them when? You did them when there was other people because you wanted other people to see you do it. You wanted to talk about it. You wanted to brag about it. And so, drugs are not the problem. Our kids, for the most part, are not just like, oh, I've got to have drugs. They're not just, oh, I've got to have alcohol. They're not just, oh, I've got to have sex. It's about connections. It's about who I am. They're trying to portray who they are to other people. So who I am has a lot to do with both nature and nurture. I know Shelley could attest to this as well as my parents, but my parents had 7 kids. And so by nature, some of us are very different. My brother Justin, Katie could tell you about him. He's a man of few words. He doesn't hardly say anything. Like literally, I've talked to him more probably last week than I did for the entire first 24 years of my life. That's not an exaggeration. And he's just different. Whereas if you talk to my brother Jason was the class clown, and he would talk to you more in half an hour than you would want to talk to anybody your entire life. So some kids are just different by nature. And then obviously there's nurture. And nurture is basically, I guess, kind of how you raise your kid to be, right? And sometimes these are conflicting, and sometimes these don't always work out. But there's really not a whole lot we can do about nature, right? If your kid is inherently shy, then there's not really, they're going to be shy, and that's fine. If your kid's inherently loud, then they're going to be loud. If they're inherently, I think some kids are just inherently do-gooders, and some of them are just inherently are not, right? But nurture is the thing that we have to be concerned about, and that's how we raise them. That's how we're teaching them. That's how we try to instill in them what we want. And just thinking about this class, we want a faith that sticks. So here's a problem that we have today. When most of you were in school, in like the 30s or whatever, just kidding. You didn't have probably, I mean, to some extent you did, but you didn't have your church friends, right? You didn't have your school friends, and then you didn't have your club friends, and then you didn't have your work friends, and then you didn't have your internet friends, right? Did anybody have internet friends when they were 12 years old? Some of your kids have internet friends they've never met before except for on the internet. And maybe they've met them before, but they only have connections to them on the internet. And so what's happening is, you've got work, you've got home, you've got internet, and then you've got play, right, or extracurricular sports. What's happening is kids can't figure out who they are because they've got 5 different sets of friends. Where I grew up, for the most part, which Grant, we didn't have anybody that went to church, but for the most part, my friends at school were the same friends that I had with sports. We didn't have club stuff. We had school sports, and so my friends at school were the same friends that I had at sports, and my friends at sports were the same friends that I had if I had a job. And so all my friends were the same. So I didn't have 5 different sets of friends. What's the problem? It's not a bad thing necessarily, but it does have maybe some negative symptoms. What's the problem with the world we live in today when kids are trying to figure out who they are and they've got 5, 6, 7 different sets of friends? What's the problem
6,
with that?
7 different personalities.
Yeah.
Different identities.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's really interesting. If you're not on Instagram and your kids are, you need to be on Instagram, by the way. Do that today. That's very important. It's really interesting, you know, some people have all the confidence in the world on Instagram. And like in a good way. Some people have bad confidence as in they, you know, well anyways, that's beside the point. But there's been people, so I look for interns for summer, and so what I do most of the time is I go to Facebook and Instagram. And it's crazy how different people can be on Instagram and Facebook than they are in real life. Some people just seem really put together, and yes, there's the whole, like, you put your best foot forward. I get that. But anyways, what I'm getting at is your kid can have a totally different personality on the internet than they do in real life. Even on, you know, the scary things is like the chat rooms and all that where there's no like accountability. But even on Instagram and Facebook, they can have completely different personalities and have this confidence and even like, I don't know the right word for it, but just like they're just, I guess, you know, maybe your kid's not very good socially in person, but then on the internet it's a completely different story and they're a different person. But yeah, you have 7 different personalities. And then what that hurts, I guess the bad thing about that, especially is, what if this personality is the Mitchell, the partier, right? And then they go to church and then they're the leader's person. And so what's happening is what they're going to do is they're going to seek praise in every single one of those atmospheres. They're going to seek praise on the internet, right? And for a girl, that means probably putting things up there that mom and dad wouldn't want to put up there. For a guy, that means probably showing off things, showing off behaviors that mom and dad wouldn't want to see, right? And then on play, you know, they get, and maybe this is not a bad one, but they get Affirm because of their athletic abilities or because of their singing abilities or because whatever they're good at. And so then they're going to seek their identity in that. And that maybe sounds better than sex, drugs, and alcohol, right? But do you want your kid to find identity in volleyball? Do you want your kid to say, well, I'm a volleyball player, and that's who they are? I hope that's not what you want. And then you've got church and home, and all of these things mixed in. And so the problem is that they're having all these different sources telling them what they want to be. And they're going to seek affirmation in whatever circumstance there is. You probably didn't have as hard of a problem with that because you didn't have all of those different things. Maybe you had some of them to some extent, but not like our kids have today. It really scares me. I don't know if it's the right word, but it really bothers me when our teens have school friends and church friends, and those don't mix. And I think most of by the way, we're very blessed here. We have awesome teens, awesome parents, very well-behaved teens. You know, I've been places where like literally the youth group had problems with weed. Not like a couple kids, but like the youth group had problems with weed or drugs or sex. You know, kids are going to struggle with that if they're between the age of 13 and 18. But for the most part, we don't have a whole lot of kids that are just, you know, groups of kids that are struggling with that. Anyways, but what happens is you've got this kid, good kid, I think even in both places, school and church, play and church. But then they have these 2 sets of friends and they just don't mix. Maybe you've seen me say this in emails, but if your kid has friends that they hang out with a lot, you need to really encourage them to bring them to church. You know, we've got senior girls and guys that have had friends, like lifelong friends, and they've never invited them to church. Now, they'll invite some of their other friends to church, but some of their closest friends they won't invite to church. Why do you think that is? By the way, I don't necessarily know exactly. Maybe there's some circumstances there that I don't know. Maybe they have invited them and they've just been neglected. But why do you think that maybe our students are not inviting their best friends to church? Maybe they're inviting some of their fringe friends, but not their closest friends. Why do you think that is?
Conflict of personalities.
Yeah.
And they start clashing and
Right, and it makes me think, well, what are they acting like with their friend that makes them scared or uncomfortable to invite them to church? I don't usually get really, usually when I am encouraged to invite someone to church is when I'm helping them on the side of the road, right? Or when I'm helping them do that, or doing a good thing for them. I don't get mad at the person at Walmart and then in that conversation by saying, hey, you know what, I'm the youth minister of Barley Woods. Would you like to come and worship with us after, we just had a heated conversation? Because the point is, I wasn't acting in a way that showed my Christian character, and so I didn't feel comfortable inviting them. So our kids want to know, who am I? And they're having a hard time figuring that out. Here's some of the questions, or some of the answers they think they come to. I am what I do. What's the problem with that? Some of our teens find the answer to the question, who I am, by saying, I am what I do. What's the problem with that?
They're going to make mistakes.
Yeah, they're going to make
have to
mistakes,
know
right?
it.
For all have sinned, right? What else?
You let what you do control you or define you instead of
Yeah.
being you and then doing whatever.
I think probably what most of us have a problem with, and most of our kids have a problem with, is probably not, and I don't mean to downplay it if someone is struggling with this, but it's probably not sinful behaviors that most of us put before God, right? I'm not putting a whole lot of sinful behaviors before God. I sin and I do put that before God, but not chronically. But what I do put before God is money. What I do put before God is fun. And when I was in high school, what I did put before God was girls and football and baseball, and all these things, right? And so I think what our teens do, and probably what we do, is we say, well, I am a banker, and that's who I am. I am a very successful financial advisor, and that's who I am. I'm a very successful football player. I'm a very successful soccer player, and that's who I am. I'm really good looking. That's who I am. I'm really pretty. All the guys really, really like me. That's who I am. So many of our teens are finding the answer to who I am by I am what I do. And maybe some of us are more okay, I'd rather my kid find who they are in maybe extracurriculars versus sinful behaviors. But ultimately, if we're not putting God first, then those do become sinful behaviors. I am what I control. What does that mean, you think? I am what I control. I think this kind of comes back to what Shelley said as far as, we can control ourselves to a point, but we cannot control ourselves. We cannot completely bridle our body, right? We're going to mess up. And so if we say, well, I am what I control, so I am good at not doing this, I am good at not doing this, and I'm bad at doing this, right? And this is probably the most important for our teens. I am what others say about me. What's the problem with that? What's the problem with finding who you are and what others say about you?
I've heard it said my whole life that if you hear something enough, you start to believe it.
Yeah.
So if other people talk, if you develop a reputation and it's not the case, and you hear it enough, you might just decide to go ahead and live up to it.
Yeah. And that's, we talked about the gospel last week. The gospel is all about grace. If we're trying to instill that into our kids, we also need to instill grace. But if every time our kid messes up, we just flip, right? Where they're going to just figure out that, well, I just mess up. That's who I am. Because that's what others are saying about me. That's what my parents are saying about me. I'm really good looking. That's what everybody's saying about me. I'm really athletic, and I really need to follow that pursuit and see how far it gets me, because that's what others are saying I need to do. We're going to wrap up really quickly. Kind of talked about this, but peer pressure is not about being cool necessarily. Your kids aren't necessarily concerned about being cool. They're concerned about not being lonely. And that's a whole lot more depressing and sad to me. It's not necessarily about being cool. It's not necessarily about having everybody think that they're hot stuff. It's about not being lonely. That's what our teenagers, guys and girls, are worried about. They're worried about being lonely. Lonely not just with their friends at school, but also lonely in the house and in the home. And that's why it's so important to not. So many of our teens statistically feel like their parents and their family abandoned them in high school, and you probably think, well, that's what they want, right? They want to be left alone. That's not what they want. They don't want to be lonely. And what's real quickly, what so many kids are doing, instead of figuring out who they are through the Word of God, is they're thinking, well, I need to figure out who I am without God. So what they do is they lock their faith away. That's what a lot of our students do when they go to college. They say, well, I'm going to lock my faith away, and I'm going to determine who I am, figure out who I am, and then it's kind of like, and if God fits back into that, then that would work. Really quickly, let's look at a few verses. The most important thing, what does the Bible say about me? What does the Bible say about our teens? First of all, we are created in God's image. There's a whole mess of lessons to learn from that. Ephesians 1, He chose us. So when we're thinking about who we are and who our teens are, we need to remind them that God chose you. He chose you, and He wants to be your father. He wants to adopt you. He wants you to be homeless. He wants you to be holy and blameless. And He also wants you to be redeemed, and He did that by sending Christ. Our kids want to be a part of something, right? That's why they do what they do. They don't want to be lonely. I wish that all of us, and especially our teens, could be as proud of this as they are their sports team, as proud as this as they are their high school, as proud as this as they are about their good-looking group of guys or their cute group of girls. I hope that they can find worth in that they're a part of a group, a citizenship which is in heaven. Romans 8 says about us as Christians, there's no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. Thinking about the gospel and grace and how some teens just think that they're not worth anything. In Ephesians 2:10, for we are His workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works. So who are our teens? They are God's. And what are they going to do? Is they're going to do good works for Christ. On the back of your calendars, there is this list. And I just pulled this, I don't know, I'll Google, I guess. But I think it's a good reminder. And so, maybe that's more important to display than the calendar on your refrigerator. But just to put this into a little bit more practical things, what they found was that rituals and rites of passage. And so, a lot of teens' events and visual things help them determine who they are. That's why 16th birthday parties are such a big deal. That's why graduations are such a big deal. It's because it helps them develop and determine who they are. But I think we can also do this with smaller things. Maybe you do this when maybe you have a birthday every year for their baptism. Or maybe you have every time it could be anything. But rituals and rites of passage are very crucial in determining and helping kids develop who they are and their identity. And so I want to encourage you to think of ways that you can work small things, and maybe once a month you do something. Maybe every time they get their grades in, if they do a good job, or even have a backup. If they do a good job, do something, and if they do something bad, do something. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a punishment. But maybe it could be, well, because you do this, we're going to do this, which is going to be more of a learning experience. And maybe it's something that they'll enjoy, but it wouldn't be something they pick, right? affirm spiritual identity. This might be the most important one, and it's probably the most awkward one. But we need to affirm their spiritual growth way more than we need to affirm their looks. Way more, and parents are as guilty as that as boyfriend and girlfriend are. Your little girl is not precious because she's super cute. Your little boy is not precious because he's real handsome. He's not really, your boy is not super awesome because he's a baller on the field, right? We need to affirm spiritual identity, heads and tails above academics, sports, looks, whatever it is. Make sure we make that a priority. When's the last time that we complimented our kids on their spiritual growth, on their spiritual maturity, versus the last time that we complimented on them on their athletic prowess, or their good looks, or their brain? We need to make sure we affirm that. We need to help them identify their passions and gifts. Remember, they're trying to figure out who they are. And if the only thing that we're doing is, football and work, then maybe that's not really their passion and their gift. You need to branch out, I guess, with the things that they're interested in. And then probably more importantly is, if they develop a passion in art, connect them with someone that they can explore that with. If they're interested in engineering, connect them with a Christian engineer that they can help explore that gift or that passion with. By the way, also don't leave out ministries. If your teen has a super huge passion for homeless, figure out how to get them in touch with the outreach ministry. Pay attention to trigger events, things like, the first week of school when they're going somewhere different, that's going to be a trigger event. They're going to be exposed to different things. When I went from the small town that I went to the big town, I never went to school with a black kid before. And so I had to have a conversation. My parents had that conversation with me. I'd seen them on TV, but I'd literally never seen a black person until I was in the 4th or 5th grade. And it wasn't like racists having that conversation, but my parents talked to me about why people are different and how I need to go out of my way to treat them special because so many people don't. So pay attention to those. Economical. If you're going through a hard time, maybe that's not something to discuss with your 9-year-old, but maybe that's something to discuss with a 16-year-old. Hey, we can't do this year because, whatever it is. Seek a variety of mentors. Your teens need to have people that they can look up to. 6+1, we have 6 years with them in the youth ministry. And that one is we really need to follow up with them as they especially start their first year of college. I want to encourage you, if you have the number of a graduated senior, college freshman right now, I want to encourage you at some time this week to send them a text. You want other parents to do this for your kid, and so we need to do this for others. Send them a text this week. Most of them are starting their first week of school, and so it'd be awesome to hear from their church family. I usually like to send those strategically, either like on a Wednesday afternoon to encourage them to church, or like Friday night at 8:30 to encourage them to probably quit what they're thinking about doing. And then remember, it's more caught than taught. If we don't know who we are, then how are our teens going to learn to figure out who they are? I hope y'all have a great rest of the day. Has it been off the whole time?
No, I just did. If it'd been off the whole time, I would have signaled you something. Or maybe if you come up with an idea for the service project.
Okay, awesome. FSI? Okay.
About 100 backpacks.
Oh, wow,
On
cool.
Thursday.
That's awesome.
Oh,
Oh, wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. They were finding out about more needs that they have there. Yeah. Food drive.
Okay. Okay, yeah, that'd be awesome. Like I said, I've got ideas, but I thought, like something like that, people got personal, this is interesting, so I'm glad to go that angle, than just picking a random.
Yes, it's not,
I'll let-
I have 5 minutes homework and I'm done. Sorry.
Thanks, Jeff.
Good.